Hi, my name is Gretchen Nicholson, and this is going to be my final presentation for EDTC 615. So background about my class and my subject area is this is about a first grade class. The total number of students is 17. I have 2 ESOL students and 1 special ed student who receives speech services. The students' ethnicities are 2 students are African American, 2 students are Asian, 7 students are Hispanic, and 2 are MU, and then 4 students are white. So the data that is being used is going to be my MAP data, which is for math, my EMAT data, which is also for math, and then my progress checks, which is also math. The intended use of data for these different pieces of data are the purpose of MAP is to measure student performance and growth through the school year, while the EMAT and progress check scores are to measure student performance on important indicators and skills. The marking period 1 and marking period 2 end of the year scores show students' progressions throughout the year at this point. So as you can see on this side is the ethnicities of the different students, whether they are receiving special education services. The LEP stands for the ESOL students, so as you can see I do have 2, and then these are going to be their MAP scores. So this score is actually going to be for last year and then what percentile they were in. This was in the fall, and this is going to be the percentile that they were in for the fall, and then this is the winter, and then the percentile that they were in. So as you can see, based on this, I have a solid group of students who do score in the green for the percentiles, while I have kind of a mixture of students scoring in the yellow and red. So as you can see, they're kind of inconsistent. The one student who does not have any data right here, she was not in attendance at Montgomery County Public Schools. This data is going to be whether my students were enriched and then their marking period 1 grade. And then this is going to be my students' EMAT data for EMAT number 1, EMAT number 2, and then the progress check that I discussed in the previous slide. So as you can see, a lot of students did score in the red for these, especially this solid group of students right here. And then I did have a mixture of greens, but then I also had no yellows for these 2 data points. So some of the things that were seen from the data that you just saw were Hispanic students performed least well in comparison with other subgroups on MAP-M. So 5-6 Hispanic students were below in the winter benchmark, while everyone who scored below winter benchmark in MAP-M did show improvement in the fall, with the exception of number 13, who she actually went down a few scores. Many students who scored Ps on the marking period 1 report card performed below average on MAP-M. So those were some of the notices that we saw. So based on the data that was collected through MAP and their grades and EMAT and their progress check, the question that I came up with was what math skills are underperforming students having most difficulty with? So based on that, I went through and I identified some learning gaps that were seen and how important they were based on a number scale. So these are going to be all the learning gaps, while these are going to be all the instructional gaps. And then it'll go to this side. These are all the learning gaps, and these are all the instructional gaps. So based on this chart, I decided that the learning gap presented was that students have difficulty understanding and representing numbers in tens and ones, which is a super important skill when talking about place value. So based on my data that I collected and my learning gaps and my instructional gaps, my SMART goal was going to be by the end of marking period 3, 80% or higher of students will score a 90% or higher on a representing numbers assessment. And how I was going to achieve this goal, or how it was going to be evaluated at the end, was I was going to take a representing numbers and base 10 assessment, and then I was also going to look at student small group observational assessments before completing the assessment. So one of the protocols that we used was a planning protocol. I really liked using this because it made me look at the different factors that I was looking at and how it was aligned to standards, what were students going to be engaged in it, what technology was used, and then the rigor and relevance to it. So it had a lot of different components, and it kind of made me look at this scale a little bit differently to see which different aspects were actually going to work, which ones were going to put in more effort for me, and kind of what knowledge the students were going to be using. So as you can see, this Prodigy game for base 10s, it was mostly 3 and 4s, which in my opinion is really great. This is going to be a 2-digit number Ready Common Core video, which is the same protocol. As you can see, it's kind of lower on the impact of learning and how they are learning about a skill, and then the use of technology is some. I also looked at the pre-assessment that I gave for my students, and how it was mostly 3 and 4s, but it was also, they needed to recall information because we hadn't been working on it, and then there was really no opportunities for technology to be used. And then this is also another part of my plan where Ready Common Core grouping 10s and 1s activity sheet. So again, it's not really technology based. Students need to learn a concept, and I decided a medium low impact since students kind of have trouble when doing worksheets. So based on those different things that I found, to take action, so I filled out my action plan. And so my goal was, again, by the end of marking period 3, 80% or higher of students will score a 90% or higher on the base 10 assessments. So now taking those different things from the planning protocol, I put them in order based on the different things and how, and of importance, what needed to go first, while what needed to go last, and how I was going to get them there. So as you can see, I did a pre-assessment first, and then I followed up with a Ready Common Core video on understanding base 10. Then I did 10s and 1s activity sheet, which was a follow-up. So as you can see, these were completed the same week. Then a grouping 10s and 1s activity sheet was the next week, and then they had assignments in Prodigy, which lasted for 2 weeks in order for them to practice. Then based on what I gave my students, their pre-assessment, so we used the tuning protocol, and the description is below of what students had to complete. Based on that, 12 of the 17 students demonstrated mastery, while 5 students did not. One of my questions for feedback to my group members was, what do you think students are having trouble with representing numbers in base 10? Here are some work samples of students who did not get there yet. As you can see, they're not really understanding 10s and 1s. And then this is very small, but she actually had to go through and count each single one. And then this is a student who did understand These are some questions that we had after. So things like, was this done one-on-one? How were students expected to complete work? Did they have to explain? Could they use manipulatives before representing it? And then could they use a think aloud strategy? So from my artifact, some things that I learned personally was that I would want to reteach this skill using manipulatives prior to reassessing. So right before assessing, I would want them to use manipulatives and then go back through and draw them. And then if giving this assessment again, I would consider having students first represent the numbers with manipulative and then draw the representation as I just said. So based on the artifacts, I changed my data plan. I kept the video, but my low groups actually watched it twice while my proficient and high group watched it once. And then I also added a showing tens and ones the easy way. So some students on their pre-assessment tried to show 72 with only ones, which would take a long time. So we went back through and I said, well, we want to look at 7 tens and 2 ones, and we want to make 7 tens and 2 ones, not spend a long time doing all the ones. And then I also added differentiating between tens and ones because, as you could see, students weren't really remembering tens and ones and their differences, how tens are sticks and ones are circles. So we went through and we looked at that, and then their final assessment in order to see what they did get from my data plan and were they making progress based on these things that I was putting in my action plan. So the results, we did another base 10 assessment. I used the tuning protocol, and then so 2 students did not demonstrate mastery of this concept. And then these are some work samples. So this student did not get there yet. As you can see, they're still not really understanding the difference between tens and ones. She actually counted up to 11 and then wrote 11. So that's not understanding how to represent the number. Well, this student was able to represent numbers, which is great. So she can identify tens, and then she could identify the ones and how to draw them. So some student strengths that I saw were, after extended practice, they were able to grasp the concept. Students who were struggling had different aspects of tens and ones that they were struggling with. Therefore, based on the pre-assessment, I could clearly see where my students were confused. While some students were mostly able to identify the representation of numbers, they had trouble actually writing it. So some weaknesses were they needed to use manipulatives in order to represent, and then students having confusion in representing numbers, as I said in the previous slide, with determining the differences between tens and ones. So my own strengths and weaknesses from this project was that I was able to look at data that I had collected and then plan different things out and change my data plan based on what students were learning, based on students how they were going. And then another area that I thought was great was I had a SMART goal, which I had determined before even creating a pre-assessment, and then I could kind of see where I wanted students to go. One area of growth that I think would be helpful to me in the future is that I would want to kind of keep up to date with my data plan a little bit better instead of having to go back and remember all of the different things that I did do during an observational assessment or anything like that. And then my overall look backs was throughout the process, I think that this data process kind of made me think outside the box, and it was also really nice to have other supporting teachers who weren't at my school look at my data and my SMART goal and kind of see what my students were doing and see if they could help me any and what they were doing. So I just thought that this overall was a really great experience for me, and I look forward to using all of the strategies in the future. All right, thanks for watching.